Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Webisode. My name is Andrew Uhas, a health services specialist here at Geisinger, and I'm excited to be joined by my colleague Darren, a wellness associate at 65 Forward. And today we're talking about making time for movement. As we know, summer brings schedule changes, vacations, and celebrations like the 4th of July coming up soon, which can make our lives feel busy and quite unpredictable. With so much going on, movement can very easily fall off of our priority list. And that's why it's the perfect time to start focusing on realistic and manageable movement. Like many of you listening, I'm very excited to learn how we can keep moving during these busy summer months. We're going to cover topics like staying motivated, managing our time, and keeping active even when our routines get disrupted. And before we begin, I just want to share a quick disclaimer with everyone. Exercise is not without its risks. People, especially those with pre-existing conditions or past injuries, should consult with their physician before beginning any new exercise program. If at any point while exercising you feel faint, dizzy, or experience any pain or physical discomfort, you should stop immediately and consult a physician. Information provided is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be used as medical advice. Please consult your physician with any questions. And Darren, first off, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today on our webisode.
Yeah, thank you for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kick us off, Darren, I just wanted to talk about the seasonal impact of exercise and how summer is typically going to affect an individual's daily exercise habits.
Yeah, so for me, summer actually kind of could go both ways for each people, in my opinion. So on one hand, you have the longer days and the nicer weather, so it could make it feel a bit easier to get outside and more enjoyable. And in those later hours in the day, it feels like we have more time to do things and be a little bit more active. But then again, at the same time, schedules could become a little bit less predictable, what you mentioned earlier. So, what I often see is people tend to lose structure, and they rely on during the rest of the year, like regular gym times or consistent daily routines. So it doesn't necessarily reduce activity. It just might change the way how it fits into our life at the current moment with the seasons being, like I said, with the longer days, nicer weather, but sometimes that kind of could ruin our structure with certain plans or vacations, things like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think many people expect summer to automatically lead to more activity, and while it certainly can, those routine changes can make consistency just overall a little bit more of a challenge. So from what you see most often, what would you say that the biggest barriers or the daily challenges that people are really running into when they're trying to stay physically active during this shift into the summer months?
Yeah, so some of the biggest barriers that I tend to see, as I just mentioned, like a seasonal priority, people tend to book their family vacations, or you had mentioned the 4th of July, we go on, our family cookouts or whatnot, what you
Hmm.
might have. So they might feel like their schedules are pretty packed up with, travel, social events, different responsibilities, and, something that we tend to push off when we have a jam-packed schedule. And another one that I do tend to see is the heat. Depending on the time of the year, we're going to get to July and August, usually the hottest months of the year. Those high temperatures, and then paired with that Northeast PA humidity, can sometimes make people feel a little bit more uncomfortable or even sometimes unsafe exercising outside. So another, barrier that people tend to try to hurdle in a sense to get back to their regular routines they follow throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Those challenges sound all but too familiar, I think, for a lot of us. Summer can definitely feel energizing, but it could also be overwhelming trying to balance everything in the challenges of every day and still making time for yourself and your individual health. So, what are some simple but realistic strategies for someone to find time for movement when, like we mentioned, these schedules start to feel packed and with everything just simply constantly changing day to day?
Yeah. One of my ways I try to help people shift their mindset is to kind of take things in a smaller, more flexible way. It doesn't always have to be this big old grand full workout session, and dripping sweat for it to count. I always tell people, especially in the months of summer where you have longer days to work with and nicer weather, things like taking a quick 10-minute walk in the morning or, stretching out while you're waiting for your hot dogs and hamburgers to get done cooking on the grill. Um, Even things like, if you have a jam-packed day and depending on if you're still working or you live on a multiple story home, just taking the stairs more throughout the day could tend to add up for certain individuals. And then for some of us who might have kids at home, usually another great strategy is to try to pair that movement with something you're already doing. So it's, for example, would be playing outside with your kids, um, and you get that family bonding time too. And you can also pair that at, a family cookout and stuff and already get your movement in for the day.
Yeah, I really like how approachable that is. Like you said, it's a great reminder that it doesn't need to be structured or perfect activity to make it meaningful. I think a big takeaway is that any activity is better than none. We want to make sure that we're being active no matter what's going on for this time of year. And you also mentioned, families with kids, and that leads me into my next question. For families, summer could add that additional layer of challenge. The kids are out of school, routines, like we mentioned, disappear. There's just that lack of structure built into the day. And where that ties into children is that for some, there's suddenly this less expectation to be active. So, what are some other fun or realistic ways that parents or caregivers can keep their kids specifically moving during the summer months without it feeling something that might be forced or more of a chore?
I mean, for those of us that do have a family out there with kids, the key is usually making the movement feel fun and natural rather than something, structured, planned, or, forced. So, kids are much more likely to stay active when it feels like some sort of playtime activity, especially depending on their age. So, usually things like going to the park, taking a ride on the bike, playing tag in the backyard, or for those of us that have a swimming pool, just going swimming on a nice hot day is usually some really good strategies. Sometimes it's also really good to involve the whole family, whether, you go for a walk after dinner or, you guys go do something on the weekend as one big activity. So usually when the kids see the adults being active, enjoying it all together as a whole family, they're usually more likely to join in.
Yeah, that is definitely really helpful. I think a big part of it is just simply making sure that it's enjoyable, it's natural, and not just something that, the kids feel like they're being pushed into, something that the entire family could enjoy. And then another big thing is motivation, and we know how that changes in the summer. These routines loosen, and as we've mentioned, consistency is harder. So, what advice would you have for somebody that needs to help with staying motivated to keep moving during these months?
So yeah, I mean, in the summer, as you mentioned, the motivation does tend to shift often. So it's important that we kind of shift our expectations too. So instead of aiming for this perfect, consistent schedule, sometimes it's more helpful to focus on staying engaged in some way. So can help to set some smaller goals, as I mentioned earlier. So moving a few times a week instead of every day. Also choosing different activities that you enjoy, especially with warmer months. You might be able to get out and do things that you enjoy more per se than those colder times of the year. So you really could take advantage of that. And, things like I already hit on was, playing with the kids or, just getting out for a quick morning or evening walk are always very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to make sure that we're giving ourselves permission to adjust our expectations too. I think that could really help people make sure that they're staying engaged instead of, feeling discouraged when these things happen. And I know for me personally, travel is a huge component of summer, and that doesn't mean that it always needs to be a long vacation. Sometimes it is, but personally, I do have a lot of, quick weekend trips, and that takes me away from, my usual routines. And that could definitely make it be a challenge to stay active when I'm away from, my home gym, or I know some people, they might have a home gym or just their daily routines. So how could people stay active when they're traveling away from home outside of their normal workout locations?
Yeah, I think travel is a really good opportunity to really rethink what movement looks like as a whole, and it doesn't have to mean sticking to this very formal workout routine. Typically, walking is one of the easiest ways to stay active while traveling. Usually, we do a lot more walking through whether it's a week-long trip or a quick weekend trip, like you mentioned, whether it's sightseeing or we're going to a new entire area that we've never been to before, or typically if we're taking an airplane to a different country or a different state, just walking through the airport in general is a lot more walking than we might intentionally decide to do. um, Other things, depending maybe where you're staying, you could do some simple body weight exercise, whether you're in a hotel room or an Airbnb. You could take advantage of some of the amenities that maybe come with your resort, like some of the resorts have some fitness centers attached to them, or usually most of the time we have a pool too, so you can do a little bit of swimming. You don't have to, but those are always options if you did want to keep with some sort of structured routine.
Yeah, and that's definitely encouraging. Just knowing that movement doesn't have to stop just because our plans changed. There are ways that we could adapt that movement with us. It might just look a little different day to day. And you mentioned a little bit ago about the heat, and that's something that I definitely wanted to bring up because that is a major factor for a lot of people. The high temperatures can make movement in the heat, one, uncomfortable, but for some people, even unsafe. So, what do you recommend for folks that they could safely adjust their routines, whatever it might be, when they're outside in that extreme heat that we are definitely going to be expecting in maybe the next month or so?
Yeah, when it does come to the heat, you definitely really have to be putting safety as your number one priority. One of the best things people can do is just adjust the timing of the activity they want to participate in that day, whether it is a workout or a walk or anything like that that is taking place outside. Usually early morning or later in the evening, it tends to be a lot cooler. Maybe the sun's just coming up or going down. So you have some time to work with there depending on your schedule. And it's also really important to scale back the intensity when it's hot. Take more breaks than you might typically do with a cooler day if you are outside. Just listen to your body. If something doesn't feel right, it's okay to stop. And sometimes the safest option too is to always move indoors if it's too hot or too humid, whether you have a home gym or you can go to a community center or, your local YMCA, or, you have a gym membership somewhere. That's always the best option, especially if you got a hot, humid day, you can go into a more controlled environment.
That is such a great reminder. First thing in the morning, maybe end of the day when the sun's not directly overhead, and where possible, shifting that workout and that exercise just to indoors and maybe a more climate controlled environment. Definitely a great tip. And tying into that hydration, hydration doesn't always get the same attention as exercise, but we know it plays a huge role in how we feel and move. So, could you talk a little bit about the importance of hydration, especially in this last example, in that extreme heat and these warmer months?
Definitely. Hydration does play a huge component in how our bodies function, especially when we are active in a warmer weather climate. So when we do sweat, we lose fluids, and if we don't replace them, it can affect our energy levels, performance, recovery, things like that. So staying hydrated does definitely help our body regulate body temperature and can prevent things like dizziness or fatigue. So usually good rule of thumb with staying hydrated, drink water consistently throughout the day. Drink and hydrate when you don't even tend to feel thirsty. Usually we wait till we feel thirsty in the moment to, drink a water or Gatorade, electrolyte beverage, whatever it might be. Usually the best method is to drink water consistently throughout the day. And then if you're going to go participate in some sort of workout or activity, start to implement, those electrolyte beverages or the electrolyte powders you can mix with water, especially if you're going to do more of a vigorous, intense activity outdoors. It's important to hydrate with some sort of electrolyte beverage. Um, and then just in general, increase the intake if you are spending more time outside and being active, more than you might be used to, because you would be surprised at how much we tend to lose on a more warmer, humid day.
Yeah, absolutely. That is some great advice and tips that you shared. It's just overall a good reminder that hydration impacts so much more than our thirst. It affects energy, recovery, even your motivation to start and continue exercise. And then shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to touch on the fact that as we get older, we know our bodies change. We hear that all the time. And sometimes that makes people a little hesitant to stay active, whether that's fear of injury or you name it. So, could you talk a little bit about the key benefits of regular movement for older adults, and then also tie that into the summer weather and any unique scenarios for them and how that's going to play a role?
Yeah, so definitely. And obviously I'm here at 65 forward, so this time of the year is a good time to remind our older population and educate them on these things. So, in the summer, older adults could be definitely more sensitive to heat depending on any underlying conditions or things like that. But so it's especially important to choose those cooler times of the day, like I already mentioned. So the early morning, later evenings, if you're going to be doing different things outside, whether you have a garden or you need to go cut the grass, things like that. Staying hydrated, as I already mentioned, make sure you're drinking plenty of water throughout the day. And then if you're going to include things like working out or, heading out for a low impact walk or hike or things like that, opt for more of a lower impact activity if it's going to be a warmer, hotter day and you didn't get out in that cooler time of the day, whether it is the morning or evening. So definitely opt for lower impact things. Try to not do things that are as vigorous, and usually things will fall in place after that.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate your perspective. It's encouraging to hear that we just need to remind everybody movement can always be adapted to remain beneficial, regardless of age and time of year, regardless of your age and experience level as well. We want to be mindful too that summer is a great opportunity to shift our mindset. It's important to be kind to ourselves, and we need to make sure that we're recognizing that life happens. We've talked before, schedules are going to change, unexpected things are going to come up. So, how does being flexible with our schedules and exercise routines help us stay consistent during this time of year rather than having that all or none mentality that we see so often?
Definitely key to be more flexible, especially during a season like the summer where, there's constant change going on with our schedules. When we're a little bit too rigid or uptight about our usual routine, it's easy to feel like we've kind of failed when we missed a workout or we missed, our typical walk that we take, later in the day. But when we take this more of a flexible approach, we can adjust and just kind of keep going in a sense. Maybe your usual routine doesn't happen, but you still get a walk in or some light movement. And then that mindset does tend to help people stay more consistent over time because they're not relying on everything being extremely perfect. They're kind of adapting as the changing environment happens in the normal summer months.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's important that we make sure that we're taking the pressure off of ourselves. We need to make sure that we're staying flexible and just making sure that our activities are going to be sustainable and realistic for long term. So never beating ourselves up if we miss a day here and there. But we know no matter what happens for absolutely every single person, we're going to fall off track at some point, and that's inevitable. We know that. But when that happens, what would you say, in your experience, is the best way to restart ourselves and making sure that we're not feeling discouraged or guilty along the way?
Well, it's really important to note that falling off track is completely normal and it happens to everyone at some point, depending on your routine. But the best way to restart is just to keep it simple. Don't try to jump back into a full routine and go crazy. Start small. Maybe things like a light activity you enjoy outside, like playing with your kids or just heading out for a short walk, as we keep hitting on. But and try not to let this play play any guilt on yourself to where the progress doesn't really just disappear just because you took a break. What matters is most getting back into it in a way that feels more manageable in that state and time, and then you can kind of build upon that and take baby steps towards it.
I like what you said there about the process, or excuse me, the progress, not just disappearing after a brief hiatus. And that's super important to know. And we know that staying on track is important. And with technology playing such a big role in our lives right now, how can we actually use that to support our exercise routine and help us stay on track? Maybe there's some apps or some tools that you use or recommend for people to stick to their fitness goals.
I think technology could be really helpful as far as a tool when it's used in a supportive way. So, we have things out there in this day and age as like fitness trackers, step counters, smartwatches can sometimes help people stay more aware of their daily movement, especially when you have a busier schedule, and it could act as just like a little nudge reminder to let you know. Um, and it's something as simple just wearing on your wrist or keeping in your pocket, things like that. And there's also a lot of apps. I'm not saying you have to go buy something, fancy to wear on your wrist. Everybody, I would think in this day and age has a smartphone that can put an app on it. So there's lots of apps that offer good guided workouts. You can set reminders on just your basic phone or set goal tracking, whether you do it in your notes app or, create a separate tab or things like that. And setting that reminder on your phone is something as simple to take a walk can make a big difference. And so you don't forget, as silly as that sounds, but that it could definitely make a big difference.
No, I think that's a great point, and I think it's important too to highlight that not everything needs to be a paid service or a paid app. I know for me, I already paid for a smartphone and it tracks my steps, so I don't need to go and pay for a different service for that when I know my phone already does that. So highly recommend for anybody out there listening, definitely see what free resources are available to you on your fitness journey. So Darren, to wrap up today's session, for me, I think it's very helpful to leave listeners with something practical. We covered a lot of, various topics today around staying active. So if there is just one thing, small, realistic step that somebody could take away from today's webisode to make movement more consistent and part of their summer routine, what is it that you would share?
Yeah, I mean, in short, and I mentioned it a few times already today, I always like to say just take a quick 10-minute walk each day, whether it's early in the morning or later in the evening, like we mentioned with those times of days, depending on your schedule. If you're still working or you're an early bird or you're someone who likes to get things done later in the day. A quick walk every day can definitely be a good starting point, and it's more of a natural day-to-day movement for us. So it doesn't really feel like we're doing much, and 10 minutes isn't much to ask for. So if you can just get out for a 10-minute walk a day, it's a very, very good starting point.
I love that. And I love that because it truly does feel doable no matter where you're starting from. That is something if you could find 10 minutes at the start of your day, at the end of your day, that's a great taking off point. So thank you for sharing that. And again, thank you so much, Darren, for taking the time to join us today and share your insights in your professional world here at 65 Forward. I think this conversation offered a lot of valuable reminders about making time and making sure that movement fits into your real life, especially during this busy, busy time of the year. And I just want to remind everybody, don't forget to tune into our next webisode in July focused on caring for your brain through sleep with our guest speaker, Dr. Anne-Marie Morse. If anyone has any questions or feedback, please feel free to utilize the Q&A feature if you are attending live, or always feel free to email us at wellness@geisinger.edu. Again, that is wellness@geisinger.edu. So thank you everyone for tuning in today. I hope that this encourages you to keep moving in ways that work for you. And remember your one takeaway for today. If you could find 10 minutes at the start or the end of your day to get up and go for a walk, it's a great jumping off point to make sure that you're making some time for you and your movement. So again, my name is Andrew, joined by Darren today. And thank you all again so much for attending. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.